11, presentation discussion regarding the fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020 operating and capital budgets.
Great.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is kind of a follow-up to the discussion that we had back in, I guess was the end of January. This is just an updated version of the presentation that I provided. Not a whole lot of new info, but a few things that I wanted to just flag for your consideration. Where we are in the process is still kind of at the front end, but wanted to just give you the lay of the land a little bit, tee up some questions, and just remind you we'll be coming back with actual proposals for how to balance the budget, things to change, all in advance of your approval at some point in April. So this is just a step along the way. So I'll go fairly quickly through a lot of this since it's mostly background material that you've already seen, but we just wanted a complete package for anyone who hadn't looked at it before. So this is just an overview of the agency, and again, just to give us some sense of the breadth and scope of what we are tasked with managing, which helps speak to why some of those numbers at the top are so big. And just to remind you, this is the current strategic plan, vision and goals that we are acting under, which are guiding the development of this budget. Some contextual numbers, you'll know that we have over the years, and particularly in recent years, been making some good progress in terms of street safety, particularly since your adoption of Vision Zero in 2014, and that's obviously something that we want to make sure continues to be a trend so that we can get to zero by 2024. Meanwhile, Muni service continues to be at its highest rated levels ever in terms of customer service. 70% is not where we strive to be, but it is the best that we've had since the agency was created, and that's a good trend, which is joined by the fact that we have an increasing share of trips taken in San Francisco by sustainable modes of transportation, something that we'll have to do more of in order to reasonably accommodate the growth that's coming to the city. And the flip side of all that is that greenhouse gas emissions are dropping in the city, though the transportation's share of the greenhouse gas emissions are growing because the buildings have been doing, I'd say, more than their share, though you'll note up in the upper right that it's transit is really a very small part of the pie, and so it's really the cars and trucks in the city that are among the biggest drivers now of greenhouse gas emissions in San Francisco. So in terms of the economy, the city continues to grow pretty significantly. Just in this strategic plan cycle, we've added nearly 50,000 people to the city, and this growth, at least for the near term, is continuing. Meanwhile, we have record low levels of unemployment. We're, I think, essentially lower now than what economists say is the lowest that we can get. And so we're essentially at full employment, as economists would measure it. And what that means is that as the economy grows, we need to attract more people into the city to work because we've run out of people here in the city to do the work. So you can see the non-resident growth in terms of jobs in San Francisco has been growing over the years. So it's more people coming into the city, more people needing to get around the city. And as I reminded you last time, and I think the city economist did as well, we are coming close to unprecedented length of post-recession growth as part of this recovery. And I did hear some economists speak last week. Nobody is currently forecasting recession. Everyone seems to generally think the current conditions, while they won't grow as fast, will continue to grow at least for the next few years. But all the economists, when they're talking about the region and the state, point to this same data point that there's a very long expansion and it can't last forever. So then, bringing this down to our level here at the MTA, the big picture of our starting point is that our revenues are flat, whereas our expenditures are growing. The flat revenues Despite the fact that the city's general fund continues to grow, and we just got the 6-month report numbers last week that showed an additional, I think, $13 million in general fund revenues to the MTA beyond what was anticipated, which is good news. Other of our revenues, such as parking revenues and transit revenues, are flat at best, and we'll show you that. But meanwhile, our expenditures continue to increase. This is historically where we've been. You can see the growth of the budget, and what we need is for the blue line to stay above the red line, our initial projections for the next 2 years, because the revenues are growing not as fast as expenditures, as that the blue line is below the red line, so that's the gap we have to close. This just gives you a little zoom in on some of those of our own revenue sources. You can see that our fares are down, and that's in part due to the free muni programs that we have authorized over the years. Our other parking related and other fees are largely flat at best. So when you put that together, our projections for the next 2 years on the revenue expenditure side, we initially were looking at on the order of a $43 million 2-year shortfall that we needed to close. This is just a little context of kind of where that baseline comes from. On the revenue side, it assumes all of the indexing of the fees, fares, and fines per board policy. There are some funds that come in that flow through the operating budget for capital use, such as Prop B, the population general fund baseline, as well as development fees and state cap and trade funds. We are assuming that the SB 1 funds that I referred to earlier will be there. We have made some other assumptions that you can see here in terms of the revenue side, including the continuation of free fares. We are going to walk through some fare proposals. One thing that I don't think I mentioned last time, and we are not currently showing, is that we have received a request from a couple of members of the Board of Education that we consider expanding our free Muni for Youth program to all youth, not just low or moderate income youth. What this budget assumes is continuation of the free fare programs as they are. And what really, just if you could go back, what really drives the expenditure numbers are that we have already negotiated a 3% increase in the first fiscal year of this 2-year budget, and we're using a 3.4% number in the second year based on numbers that we get from the Comptroller's office. So those, as well as the pension numbers and the other indexing that lays on top of that for non-personal services, is what drives our expenditure growth. So since we first developed that $43 million baseline, there have been some adjustments that we have been able to make. One is the general fund baseline. The 9-month report, I believe, will come out in March, and we may get hopefully get further good news from the general fund, but we will continue to update the general fund projections that we get from the city. But we've been able to do so since we created our first baseline. There are some changes, such as the change we made with the Sutter Stockton garage, which impacts both the revenue and expenditure side. And we've just incorporated other more current estimates on revenue and expenditures than we had when we first created the baseline. So that's brought our projected shortfall down to just shy of $31 million. So we need to close that $31 million gap, but then there's also other stuff that we would like to or need to do. One is to integrate the Muni Service Equity Strategy into our service programs, and that I think we'll have another slide on that, but this is per board policy that we implement whatever findings come out of the Muni Equity Strategy process. There are a number of service changes that we are poised to make, such as the opening of the Central Subway in December of 2019, the expansion of the rail fleet. We should have 24 in service by this summer and 68 through the end of this 2-year budget cycle. We have a new bus division that we will be opening up this summer to address the expansion in the bus fleet and the bus service we've been putting in place over the last 2 years. We will need to continue to invest in maintenance and modernizing our maintenance practices, and as we've talked about before, continuing to train our workforce as the demands on our workforce change, as technology and other factors come into play. So depending on how you look at that, it's on the order of $60 million a year of kind of things we'd like to do on the transit side that aren't included in the baseline. And just to spend a minute on this, you'll recall the Muni Equity Strategy charged us to look at these 8 neighborhoods, look at their transit service relative to the system-wide average, and where we saw any deficiencies to make changes. So that process is currently underway. The outreach is happening now. We will be coming to the board next month with the recommendations from the Muni Equity Strategy as per the board policy, and we'll need to incorporate those and make space for those into the budget. I did want to note for you that our fund balance remains healthy. We have a policy, you've established a policy that we keep an equivalent of 10% of the operating budget in reserve, which is on getting up towards $110 million. Our current projected balance is nearly double that. We did that dip down you see in the last year was because I recommended and you authorized expenditure of fund balance dollars for one-time needs, but it still leaves us in a pretty healthy position. And that $13 million of good news that we just got on the general fund is just $13 million that goes right into the fund balance because we don't have the authority to spend those funds. So you can expect that we will again be proposing some strategic use of fund balance for one-time purposes, but still leaving us with a very healthy reserve and above our 10% reserve requirement. So I guess I just hinted on the first thing on the revenue side is that we've not yet assumed any use of fund balance. So that's one tool that we have in the kit. And any other new or increased revenue that we've not captured is still out there. As I said, I think when the general fund report comes out next month, there could be more good news on their projections for the next 2 years in terms of amount of general fund we have available. There are some other items at play that could positively or negatively impact us as well. On the expenditure side, aside from the transit issues that we discussed that are not in the baseline, there are a number of different items here that we have not yet fully incorporated that we will either need to incorporate or need to make some changes. I won't go through all of these, but these are the things that as we get closer to getting better numbers on what our needs are going to be, both internally and from other agencies, these are going to impact the gap that we have to close. So we will be looking at fund balance as a possibly part of the solution. For example, right now, we take some ongoing operating dollars and put them in the capital budget to use as reserves. So one thing that we might do is rather than direct those operating dollars to the capital budget, use fund balance for these one-time needs in the capital budget and keep the operating funds in the operating budget. Likewise, the population-based general fund baseline increase that Prop B created is a source that has been fully going to capital, but given that the biggest drivers of the gap in our budget is due to the increased service that we need to provide because of the growing population, it seems like potentially an apt use of the funds that are driven by population growth to direct those to ongoing muni service needs. On the expenditure side, I've already asked the divisions to identify ways that they can trim their budgets without actually reducing staff. So we have a number of proposals there, and the transit division, as the largest part of our budget, has come up with a number of different ways that they might be able to better use the funds that are allocated or redirect some of the things rather than buying parts to sit on a shelf, redirect those funds to direct service provision through better inventory management and maintenance management. I do want to flag, I talked about the June ballot in my director's report, but on the November ballot likely will be a measure that would repeal Senate Bill 1. For us, that's $27 million a year on the operating budget side. Somebody made comment about the condition of our streets. $23 million a year for street paving goes to Public Works from SB 1, as well as direct capital funds we get and other funds that we can compete for. So if we're assuming that SB 1 is not repealed, we're assuming it is passed, so that's our assumption in the budget. This is a risk that would change what we're programming these funds for if these funds go away. There are other potential risks. I'd say the biggest one is what happens with our economy. I think presuming nothing happens between now and when we approve the budget, it's a risk that we would have to manage once the budget is underway, as we would an SB 1 repeal or whatever we end up negotiating with our labor partners for that second year, for which we just have placeholder amounts right now. So we walked through a number of proposed fare policy changes. These would be deviations from the standard indexing. And so I've asked again our revenue manager, Diana Hammonds, to kind of update you on our thinking, and in particular to answer a couple of specific questions about these proposals that you all raised back in January.
Riskin. Ms. Hammonds.
Good afternoon, members of the board. As Director Riskin mentioned, a lot of this information will be familiar to you from the budget workshop, but we will go a little bit more in depth on some of the items. PowerPoint. I need to bring the PowerPoint up. Okay, great. So just a reminder, the pricing of our fares, there should be some goals that we look at in addition to just generating revenue. And as a reminder, what we're looking at is incentivizing transit ridership, prepayment, providing customers with more convenience and flexibility, also promoting equity. And I just wanted to remind everyone that there is a Title VI equity analysis that is done in conjunction of any fare increases, so that will come at a later date. And then on the next slide, this is just a reminder of all the great work that's been done over the last 5 years, really making the SFMTA a leader across the country in terms of providing low-income access to transit service by reducing many of our fares, providing free muni for seniors, people with disabilities, youth. And on the other side of that, we also have tried to equalize our fares for folks who are not low income. And so we've done that through establishing that consistent discount for all non-free muni customers. We also increased premium on the monthly A pass, again, in an attempt to recover additional revenue, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that maybe didn't achieve the goals that we hoped for. And on the single ride fare increases, we talked a little bit last time about how we are seeing some movement towards Muni Mobile and Clipper, eliminating those cash transactions. Have an update on that information. I think your packet may include that. We're seeing a little bit more progress even over the last 6 months. So that's encouraging, and we are recommending consideration of potentially, again, holding that discount for Clipper and Muni Mobile customers and increasing that differential to further incentivize people onto those fare categories. And then in terms of monthly passes, as I mentioned, the A pass is really where we've seen some transition of customers away from that product, which actually provides a great service of options for customers within the city to use BART instead of Muni. And as noted, a 28% drop in sales over the last 5 years, which is pretty significant. So we are, a couple of options that we've looked at is establishing a dollar amount as a cap, maybe a percentage as a cap. Another option could be a dollar amount with a percentage increase on that. Again, and so this sort of shows, of course, if you use a percentage, it's going to grow at a higher rate. We might end up at some point being in the same place that we are right now. And then the next slide actually responds to some questions that I believe Director Borden, you may have asked at the last meeting, that kind of talks about what are our monthly pass users doing right now, because again, we don't want to put policies in place that push people out of those prepayment options. And so what this shows is most of our customers are kind of within a 25 to 36 area. The folks who may not be using maybe as many trips as you would think. There is some convenience that comes with purchasing that monthly pass, and you just don't have to think about it, so that could be one reason. And then if you look at the numbers there, so currently what our pass is priced at is the equivalent of 30 trips, about 15 round trips a month. Our indexing proposal for the monthly passes would bring that to 31 and then back down to 29. But the overwhelming majority of our customers take more than 36 trips. And we've looked at the numbers for the last 5 years, and we really don't see within the ranges where we've been that there's really any transition of customers. I think as once you get kind of above that 36, 40, that we might see that. But I think that we're in a pretty safe place right now. And then on the visitor passports and cable cars, last time we brought to you a proposal that would have the significant reduction shown on the Muni Mobile and Clipper side. What we're showing as an alternative here is potentially having that discount also for the in-person sales. So again, it's another option to look at. We really do want to encourage prepayment on this area, so we'll be looking for some direction from you folks on this. What this new alternative shows is kind of using that cash fare differential model for the single trips as the basis for those. It's why you see a little bit of a difference there. We are looking at these fares in terms of how we think customers are using these passes. So maybe not assuming that people in one day are taking 2 cable car trips and 3 or 4 Muni trips, but really trying to price them at a rate which makes it a benefit for people to use. And then one of the questions that did come up on the visitor passports as well was the idea of having a family pass. We did find that, at least on our Muni Mobile side, that 98% of folks are purchasing 3 or less passes. And also, with this significant change that we're proposing, there is actually a discount already embedded in what we're proposing, because it would lower a one-day passport from $92 to $48 for a family of 4. So at this point, the discounts are pretty significant, even if we still do the single products. And then again, we talked about introducing a low-income single-ride fare that is currently under discussion at the regional level. This would allow our existing Lifeline customers to have the option of using single-ride discounts instead of what we have now, which is only a monthly pass. Sometimes it can be very difficult for people to purchase, to come up with the money at one time. So having single rides really does benefit a larger percentage of customers. Again, this is at the regional level. It requires a change and development to Clipper, which is not always in our control, but we're hopeful that this will be an option. And looking at maybe 12 to 18 months, that something like this would be implemented. And then something new that we want to try out, we've heard a lot from the CAC and from other stakeholder groups about the idea of having a one-day pass that would, not only does it make it more attractive of a product to folks who may not ride enough to use a monthly pass, but also if you've already paid for that pass and maybe you're taking a third trip, you'll go ahead and use Muni instead of some other options because it's already paid. And what we were looking at here is, what's the right pricing for it? There was a question also that came up at the budget workshop, will we be losing money if we price it at a certain point? But what we found is that 98% of our customers are using 2 or less trips on Clipper with their purchasing single rides. So we feel still that between the 2 and 2.5 multiplier that would be a good place for that. A couple of things that we didn't talk about last time was a bulk sales discount, but I think this goes again to the point of prepaid fares. Right now we have third-party vendors who we have a commission, 75 cents for every item they sell. That also requires that we deliver and it's on consignment and there's a lot of account management. But we also have large tour groups and other just conventions or things like that call us and ask us, what kind of discount if they want to buy 1,000 or 5,000 tickets, and we don't have a process for discounting that right now. And I think that would be a huge benefit because it's a lot easier to do one transaction, have them distribute them instead of having folks wait in line at our cable car kiosk. So this is something that we've heard for many years, and I think it would go a long way for helping with our prepayment. And then the next one is our institutional pass program, which you may be familiar as our class pass. That's kind of the model where it exists right now. Basically, it's a revenue neutral model where you take the entire population, you figure out how many people are riding Muni, and you distribute the costs out across everyone. And the requirement is that everyone has to pay. An example of this is the expansion of to SF State, which is probably, it is our biggest program to date. We have 30,000 students now that are all participating. They all pay this fee as part of their registration. And again, although there is an assumption that some folks won't use it, there's also the hope that if they have it paid, they'll decide to use it. And so what we're looking at going forward is that instead of having a very strict monthly rate, that we're able to work with different institutions, organizations, maybe it's even special events, to use that model and to be able to have that flexibility to enter into agreements with them. Again, this is just a summary of the options that we've talked about. And then the next page, we just have some questions. I've answered some of them in the presentation, but just to highlight some of the other ones. Someone had asked, in terms of, we have about half of our monthly pass holders. Half of the trips are made by monthly pass holders right now. And then for the visitors side, I think I answered a few of those questions. It does detail how many rides we're assuming for the pricing. I think it makes a little bit more sense in terms of what the customers are doing. It's hard to read through that. And then there were some questions about working with hotels and other organizations to build that cost in. And there are relationships that are built, definitely have talked with communications, and they're looking at expanding that role. It's not a kind of a target group that we've worked a lot with, so we're hopeful that those kind of relationships will continue to grow. Again, I answered the question about that already. Low-income single-ride fares, we are fortunate that we have a great system in place right now to process low-income eligibility, partnership with the Human Service Agency, so we don't see that as being a problem. In terms of a fiscal sponsor, which was also a question that came up, I think we probably all can understand that it's not something that could be depended on. It really would take a very significant effort to try to keep culminating that, and it's not guaranteed, which could lead to a pretty sizable gap in the budget if that didn't come through. So not something that our agency is focused on. And I think the rest of the questions were answered already in the presentation. So anything?
Thank you, Ms. Hammonds. Director Riskin, would you like to go on with the rest of the presentation, or would you like me to pause for a little board input on the fares?
Why don't we finish up with at least the cable cars, just responding to the last part of the fare conversation, then perhaps it would be good if the board had any questions on fares or
Excellent.
suggestions.
Let's do that then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot about the last one.
Oh, that's okay.
During the budget workshop, we heard loud and clear from all of you that you're very interested in our agency moving towards a place where we eliminate the cash from the cable car. So internal stakeholders, between transit, communications, revenue, we all got together. And we feel like this is something that we can do, laying out kind of a timeline for this, hopeful for maybe an early fall 2019 rollout. It will take a significant commitment, primarily on the communication side, so working to develop kind of a budget, resources, what that would look like. really enhancing our relationships with the tourism industry and hotels, because the most important thing is to make sure that folks know what the rules are before they get here. So we felt pretty confident about that. We're going to continue to meet, and that will be our goal is 18, 24 months to try to get something in place.
All right, thank you. And I think that is wonderful. I think we did hear that quite clearly from the board, that moving towards cashless cable cars would be something that we definitely would all support. All right, I want to just pause here so we can go through these. I think if everybody flips back to page 37, where we have the fare change options all laid out. And I think it might be a good opportunity for board members to just share what they're feeling about some of these options. Who would like to start us off? Director Ramos?
Give me, if I can just.
Okay, no problem. You pull back up. All right.
On
I'll go ahead and get started on these. I think, Ms. Hammonds, that all of these options look really good, and I'm actually looking at it. I'm in favor of all of these. Option one, again, we had talked about this at our breakout, increase the cash fare differentials. Totally in support of that one. Option 2A and 2B, the limit the A-Pass to $15 premium or 20% premium above M-Pass. I am supportive of that. It's interesting, I do wonder, you showed that the number of people buying the M-Pass, which allows people to use BART in addition to Muni, is, if I have that correct, that's it's the other way around. A-Pass uses BART, M-Pass doesn't. That the number of people buying the A-Pass is going down. And that's interesting, because I know of so many people who commute in that BART corridor who take BART instead of Muni, and I'm wondering if our improvements on the 14 line are helping those people feel less impacted by that and feeling like they're willing not to spend the money on BART. I know that's your commute corridor, Director Borden, to not spend that extra money on BART and move instead to, hopefully, our 14R line. And this might be a question that we could answer later, is what is the increase we're seeing on the 14R since we've put in the red transit lanes, if you don't know off the top of your head?
I don't know, but we're definitely seeing an increase in ridership. And but the decline in the use of the A-Pass, I think, has been happening over the course of 5 years. So
Right.
it
Since you said since
predates the improvements
2013.
on the 14.
Yeah.
So that's why we think it has at least something to do with the
pricing.
price.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if we can kind of correct that or make it less onerous to buy the A-Pass. Are we going to see people come back, or once having gotten a taste of the 14R with all of its new improvements, are they going to stay on the 14R? The fare differential for visitor passports, I like that one. I am in support of that. I think that kind of does tie in with the cable car as well. If we can get people buying their fare media in advance, I think that is a good one. Low-income single ride, option 4, I'm very much in support of that one. I think that's something, again, that we heard from the board at the retreat, that most board members did seem to be in favor of that. Option 5AB, a new day pass without cable car, would be great. I know when I've bought passports for visiting relatives, Auntie Cheryl was very disappointed when visiting relatives did not ride the cable car, because I felt like I was paying for the cable car, and they didn't actually get out there and ride it. So I think in a situation like that, a day pass could be really good, or the change of the passport rate. 10% discount for bulk purchases of 100 or more cable car tickets and passports. Again, great. Anything that we can do to encourage people to buy all of those fare media in advance and get themselves all sorted out, know how they're going to pay, understand how the payment works. I think that one is a great one as well as option 7, expand the use of the institutional pass models to other groups and organizations. Again, I think just anything we can do to get people buying them in advance, just trotting right on board without delaying our buses while they're figuring out how to pay, is a fabulous thing. All right, other board members. Director Ramos, any input?
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I agree with everything that you recommended. A couple of things that I would point out from that I still have questions about or concerns. The first one is around option 1, around increasing the cash fare differential to 50 cents for cash fares. And as excited as I am of that prospect, I think it'd be important for us to also complement that with improving the way that our customers would have access to Clipper cards and or the awareness of how to reload a Clipper card. In the work that I do, I'm learning that that even when people get Clipper cards for free, essentially, there is very little reloading of the Clipper cards that they get, simply because it's just not practical for a lot of us to reload them. So I was really excited about this prospect just a few weeks ago, but looking at data recently that's showing that, well, actually, we're not seeing a whole lot of people reloading them as much as they could be. And so I think there's a problem, there's a disconnect there that I think that we need to address before we go too much further in that capacity. Although I feel like it would be so valuable if we could do it, because it saves us so much time and money when we can get people paying with Clipper cards. I do like also option 3 a lot for the visitors, however, because I think that most folks that if you're visiting, you know, you're probably a little bit more of means and you probably can afford those types of fare differentials for sure. I think also option 4, I've heard more and more a call for this. I am wondering how viable that is and how much it would pertain to, or yeah, how much it would depend on this new dosage of funding from RM3 for Clipper, what they call C2 or Clipper 2.0 at all, if any.
This would be a pre-C2
Oh,
change.
Excellent.
That's
So we can
for-
do this with our existing Clipper.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Good news.
Yeah, that is great news.
Okay, thank you. And then, let's see, I think that for me also, I'm really excited at the prospect of option 7. You all might recall when every time the commuter shuttles come up and we've got people that are organized here calling for more employer-based programs to do more to get employers to provide passes to their workers and or clients in whatever capacity. And I love the San Francisco State model. And I think that if we can replicate that with more institutions and employers, I think that we'd be in a really good way. So I deeply appreciate staff for putting all together these options. And thank you for responding to all of our questions. I think that we've got a lot to think about. And I'll hold my comments for now on that.
Great, thank you. Directors, Director Rupke.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said as far as being supportive of basically all these options. I guess I would highlight our need as an agency to educate the public about why prepayment, institutional passes, cashless systems are so important for us and for them, as far as like safety for everyone involved and efficiency for transit and all that stuff. So I don't know if we can get, the press to focus on that. I know there was some press about the cable car stuff, not necessarily so positive, but, if we could harness that and make it educational so people understand why we're moving forward with these types of policies, I think that would be a really important thing as we roll these out. But I don't really have any helpful suggestions beyond that right now.
Great, thank you, Director Rupke. Director Borden.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Director Ramos's point about the cash fare differential issue, and I think if people are not reloading their cards, I think part of it's people might lose them or misplace them, and you don't want to have a lot of money on a card. I actually recently found a Clipper card that I lost like a year ago, and it was actually in my office and under something that I hadn't seen, but I remember feeling so disappointed, and I obviously could afford to refill my Clipper card, but that might be part of the reason, and I know that there's a registration process, but for some people that may be onerous. So I'm less preferring of option 1. I think option 2, going back to somebody who takes every day both Muni and BART, I think that a lot of people live where they could walk to BART, and if the A pass were of a differential that wasn't so disadvantageous or perceived to be disadvantageous, they would use both systems. Therefore, they would buy our pass as well. But I think sometimes people will just walk to avoid paying for the Muni bus, the perceived upmarket charge on the fare. So anything we can do to create better parity, I think, I could walk to Glen Park or I can take the bus to 24th. I choose to take the bus to 24th, but a lot of people, I think, are in that same situation. So making that differential less so that people will choose to get the A pass would be a good idea. I'm fine with the fare differential of visitor passports, and I think incentivizing prepayments, we can easily work with all the travel sites and stuff to help publicize that, and we have many of them actually located here in San Francisco, so I think if we can help push that, that also help us, because it's just like the gift card model. Lots of people buy things they don't actually ever use, but you've got the money, so let's do that. I think pretty much the institutional pass is something I heard a lot about when I've been out talking to students, and one of the concerns, so we can do more of that across the Bay Area. That would be really phenomenal, and definitely I'm 100% supportive of that. Like the day pass idea as well. I think that also helps for people who have the choice between commuting between Muni and BART as well. Maybe they do it less frequently, so it wouldn't really, an A pass wouldn't make sense, but this would maybe incentivize them if they're taking BART into the city to then take multiple trips on Muni while they're here before they head back to wherever they live. So, and then the discount for bulk passes is, of course, that's a great idea.
All right. Director Shu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm generally supportive of all of these. Thank you for laying them out so nicely. I did have one question on option 5, which I think is really interesting. It looks like the data that you're showing suggests that this would actually be a net add in revenue potentially, and not a net loss, right? So that almost seems like a no-brainer in that case, right?
Well, I don't know that we'd want to
Predict it for sure, yeah. But.
With a lot of these things, I think you may lose some people and gain others, and so I think we're looking at this really as sort of a revenue neutral model. It's finding what that right price is so that you minimize that.
And what would be sort of the calculus in deciding whether it's 2 or 2.5x? Like, what goes into that decision? Is it, because I did see that some cities go 2 and some do a little bit more.
I think part of it is how much you feel on the end. Will you increase ridership on one and maybe lose on the other? And so part of it really, when it's something new like this, is somewhat best guesswork. But doing this on Muni Mobile will allow us to figure out what that best rate is. And again, part of it is what we can't really quantify, which is getting folks to use Muni during those non-peak hours when otherwise they might be taking trips using private automobiles or something else because they have that product in their hand already.
Right. Yeah, because it does seem just generally that a lot of people will buy it for the convenience and they may not actually make those extra trips, but if you have that convenience, you can take the second trip, you might not take more, and that's kind of a win-win for everybody, so that's interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Torres.
2 questions. Number 1, have you provided outreach to high schools and colleges within our area's reach to educate them about what these options might be for them?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
Has our agency reached out to high schools or colleges in respect to these options and what might work better for them as students?
We haven't done outreach yet on these particular proposals, but over time, there's been a lot of outreach we've done, particularly when Free Muni came in. There was a lot of outreach at the high school level, and that was when we extended up to 18, and that was based on feedback that we got from high school students. There's over the years been a lot of outreach to college students, and that's how we got.
And maybe I need some outreach because all of these options are very confusing to me. Because I don't know which ones are going to be best, number 1. Number 2, which is going to be best to ensure that we keep up our revenue stream. Mm-hmm. The only thing that appealed to me, one of the things that appealed to me was the family pass for visitors, which I think is so important. We have so many people coming to the city, thank God, and always looking for ways to reduce their cost if they can. And a family pass might be an incentive to do that. And lastly, I just think that when you're talking about removing the cable car provision from a particular pass, I think the chair was noting that, correct?
I think that the way you have it laid out right now, Ms. Hammonds, is that the passport keeps the cable car, but then we also do have the day pass without cable car. So a visitor could kind of decide, do they want to do a passport, which lets them take advantage of the cable car as well.
Okay.
So, good. Thanks. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Director Ramos.
Just to remind us that AC Transit across the way the Bay just implement recently a day pass, and it would be interesting to see how successful it's been over there recently, to see if it's, because I know that there were some questions as to how good it was being, or how well it would respond to their riders' needs. So I would really encourage us to look at lessons learned and best practices from them. Secondly, I wanted to clarify the option one. I appreciate the differential, and particularly with respecting the 25-cent limited for people with reduced fare, limiting to that. But either way, I still think that there should be a component with this, like a built-in component. Like if we do this, we need, in whatever direction or not, well, even or not, we should be still really providing more education about how to use Clipper and how to reload it and what have you. I wish that we could just depend on Clipper and MTC to do all this. It's pretty clear that they can't or won't, or I don't know what the holdup is, but it feels like there's a whole lot more that could be done. So if we go that route, and if we can protect the 25 cent to the reduced fare holder users, I think that it would absolutely require something to that effect. Some of that marketing and outreach around how to reload your Clipper card and where you can get them and everything else.
Thank you, Director Ramos. That is a good point, and I do want to call out the, if we do institute a new all-day pass, that it is initially only available on Muni Mobile. So that kind of, yeah, because, right, it makes sense to have it available. That'll help drive people to Muni Mobile, but I hear you about the education around Clipper cards, and I do think that continues to be such a challenge. I know of people that I worked with who use Clipper cards who were very confused about the cash wallet side of it versus the monthly pass side of it, and could they have both on the same Clipper card? So I think it's a little more confusing than we appreciate, because we know so much about it and we tend to deal with it more regularly. And I think that's not the case with everyone. So that's going to continue to be a challenge. How do we continue to transition people to Clipper? So we'll appreciate all your hard work on this, Ms. Hammond. Does anyone have any more comments? If not, I'm going to let Ms. Hammond sit down and let Director Riskin continue on with the rest of the presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for all the
and
work
I'll
on
remind
that.
you, when we put this cash differential into place 2 years ago, your direction to us was much the same, and we did work with MTC to do kind of a push on education. It sounds like it maybe needs to be done again, maybe wasn't adequate in the first place. So we will circle back with MTC, let them know that the board may contemplate this, but that we would really need the assurance of the education to folks of where to get them, and maybe more importantly, how to easily reload them. So point well taken on that.
Excellent, thank you.
We did want to just close out on the capital budget. There's not as much to talk about on that's new and different, but just to remind you, the capital budget is really where we can drive the physical changes on our streets to meet some of our top policy goals, such as Vision Zero and Transit First, as well as keeping our assets in a state of good repair. The CIP is the 5-year constrained program from which the first 2 years of which become the 2-year capital budget. This is what it looks like. The current one is just under $3.5 billion. Our current projections of revenues bring us down quite a bit below that. A big chunk of the change is the Central Subway being nearly complete as we start this next and last cycle. These are the particular lines. These are the specific categories within the capital investment program. You can see there are a few areas where we're showing increases, but this is really just based on what revenues that we anticipate will be coming, with the Central Subway dropping off, with some state bond money that supported security improvements dropping off. Those are some of the changes that you see reflected here. So we'll be bringing you more detail on the capital budget. We're getting close to having that finalized in terms of a proposal for you. And then this is what it looks like going forward from here. We start going out to do a lot more outreach to solicit public feedback. As you can see, that probably one of the main areas of feedback is going to be on the fare changes, because it's, I'd say, largely a status quo budget, at least at the moment, We do have to figure out how to accommodate those muni service needs as well as the equity strategy recommendations. But I think the fare issues will invite people's attention. So we will be back to you, looks like at the March 6th meeting. We'll come back again at March 20th. As you can see, we want to give you and the public lots of opportunity to see where we're headed, and we'll start sharing more so in March our ideas of how we're going to get to a balance, and we should around that time also be saying what the equity strategy recommendations are. We started giving very high-level briefings to members of the Board of Supervisors just to keep them in the loop and to try to get everybody on board for our May 1st submission to City Hall. So that concludes the presentation. Be happy to take any feedback, questions, comments.
Good, thank you, and thank you for the highlighting of the budget timeline. I think that will be helpful. It will be good to hear from the public and the Board of Supervisors on this. I do just want to loop back to a couple things, discussing recommending strategic fund balance use. I know we have talked about that before, and we have done it, and I am in favor of that. I think that when we have Vice Chair Heineke back at a budget meeting and he weighs on this, that will be helpful. I think a strategic use of that is very important. And I was wondering, Director Riskin, I don't particularly remember when that ballot measure went through, how it was, I'm sorry, I'm confusing my fund balance versus my population growth funds. Fund balance, I am in favor of strategic use of the fund balance. The population growth fund, I don't remember off the top of my head when that ballot measure went through, what it was stated that the funds would be for. Was it stated that they would just go into SFMTA, it would be lumped in with the general fund increase, or?
So it's calculated separate. So now we get our kind of allocation from the general fund and then the supplement that comes from Prop B. The Prop B legislation required that 75% of the funds go for transit. Okay. And 25 go for streets. It does give us flexibility between capital and operating, how those are used. Last time we used it fully for capital, but again, because the population growth is driving some of our operational needs, I think it's reasonable to consider at least using part of it for operational needs. But you'll see that the capital revenues are lower than they've been, not even accounting for Central Subway, so we have a lot of capital needs that we're trying to meet too. So there's no easy answers to any of these things. It will all be trade-offs.
Good. All right. We are lucky we do have our fund balance that we can dip into if we need to. Just to loop back to the parking garage revenue, I see that revenues are down in our parking garages. And I know I was given a tour of the Polk and Bush garage by Mr. Graff, showing the new technology that's in place to make it easier for people to enter, to pay, to exit, to do all those things. Do we anticipate that with the new technology in place and the fact that it's going to be easier for people to use the garages, that we might see that revenue bounce back? And I see Mr. McGuire coming up to answer my question.
Good afternoon, Tom McGuire, Sustainable Streets Director. So we do believe that the parking access revenue control system, which is the new gate arm, credit card clearance, and security system that we're putting in the garages, will certainly have a positive impact on our customers. We think it'll help them feel safer and more secure in the garages, definitely much more confident in their payments, and more confident that we'll get their payments. At this point, I think it's probably a little premature, since we've only rolled the parks out to about 7 garages at this point, to say, yes, we are sure we'll get X% more or less revenue. But I do know it'll have a very positive impact on the customer's impression. Hopefully that'll drive some of that traffic, particularly parkers who are choosing between private and MTA garages, maybe cause them to choose the product we have to offer.
It's such a tough story to tell people when parking is a thing that everybody seizes on as being difficult and being stressful. It's a hard story to sell, to say, not in the parking garages. If you come into the parking garages, it's here, it's accessible, it's easy to pay for, it's easy to enter and exit. So I can see that that's going to be a tough narrative to change in the mind of drivers in the city.
Right, and obviously, as we've been discussing at this meeting and previous meetings, we certainly think that the TNC phenomenon probably has something to do with that.
Has had a hit on the parking garage use, absolutely. All right, those were my only comments or questions. Directors, does anyone have any more questions for Director Riskin? Any feedback? again, we will have this to us, as Director Riskin pointed out, the budget timeline. This will come back to us again. Yes, Director Torres?
Can you share, if you can, or if you will, what the response was from the Board of Supervisors that you visited with?
I've only gotten to 2 or 3 of them so far. The folks that I've talked to have generally liked again, what they're really focusing on are those fair recommendations, because those are the more tangible recommendations, and so far I've gotten a pretty positive response to those.
All right, thank you very much. If I have no other questions or comments, this was a discussion item only, so we will go to public comment.
Madam Chair,
I
we
have
don't
any-
have anybody who has turned in a speaker card on this, and I don't see anybody moving forward.